Well, hello and glorious day to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar today. Today, we actually have an incredible guest. We're going to be talking about the genetic blueprint of brain health, what you need to know. We're going to dive into genetics of the brain, of brain health, the transformative power of light, sound, and vibration on epigenetics. We'll explore how your genetics impacts brain function and how innovative therapies like BrainTap can positively impact your gene expression, enhancing cognitive performance, stress resilience, and overall mental well-being. We're also going to take a look at the science behind how all of this works and discuss some practical strategies that you can implement to achieve optimal brain health. So I have with me my brilliant and beloved colleague, Justin Harris, to help, with this interview and to provide some fantastic information, in his cache of information and how he works with clients and looks at genes. And we both have the immense pleasure of being joined by the founder of BrainTap, Dr. Patrick Porter. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here. I love the DNA company. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And for those people who may not have heard of you or BrainTap, we would love to have you give a brief little introduction into who you are.
Sure. I've been in this field actually since 1986, so maybe longer than some of the people have been alive that are checking in. But when we first started, of course, we didn't know that we would affect genes and all of these things that are happening. This is something relatively new since 2003 that people have been using. But what we decided was, because I'm a psychologist, my background is, if you're wondering how I got into this, but before I went to school for psychology, I went to school for electronics. So I got to marry the two things that I love. They say, do what you love and you never have to work a day in your life. So I feel like I'm still working with my dad, who was a seminar leader. He used to help people with a technique called the Silva method. So I grew up actually doing this technology, but we only had the sound technology called binaural beats and isochronic tones. What I've done over the years is I combined all of that in. And what we were really looking for was how to relax the brain and get it out of pain. So that's how we first started. And then we found out, of course, 40 years later, all of the other beautiful things that this technology does for people. And it's non-invasive and anyone can use it. And we've kept the price so that the end user can actually benefit from it. So there was a time when you had to be a medical doctor to buy it, but we changed that. And now it's available to the general public.
Wonderful. And I am so excited to dive into this. So also, Justin, hey, welcome. How's it going?
Oh, it's going great. I'm actually really excited about this. This is kind of a surreal experience for me because, Dr. Porter, I've literally fallen asleep to your voice more times than I could possibly count. I love the BrainTap. I use it on a daily basis, and there's a lot of connective tissue, right, between what you guys do at BrainTap and what we do at the DNA company. We're really proud of our executive function profile that we use because we talk about the genes and how they have this baseline encoding of a lot of these different neurochemical pathways. And I constantly recommend it to patients because we can see based on, your noradrenaline pathway, if you have like a predisposition to enhanced, PTSD response, anxiety response, maybe you have an overactive dopamine pathway and you're more likely for binging behavior, addictive behavior. Maybe your brain-derived neurotrophic factor is just a little bit less at a baseline. And it's like you just insert BrainTap into any number of these things, and somehow or other it helps. It improves every single one of these pathways. I use it in my life, a period of stress going on. It's like BrainTap is so reliable. And what I love about it, especially, is it doesn't ask your permission. Like it's hard to meditate for a lot of us. My brain is 10 times faster than my circumstance most of the time. And I think a lot of people on this call can relate. BrainTap is awesome because it just hijacks the whole thing. You just press play and it does the work for you. It's absolutely unbelievable. So I'm really honored to have you on here today, Dr. Porter.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think we all have a propensity to want to escape, but we need a positive escape because a lot of people look for escape, but they look for it in the wrong places, and it more does more damage than good. So, yeah, we need to shut down that default mode network and help to clear out some of the dopamine that might be overdriving the system and things like that. So, yeah, you're right on there.
Well, I'll tell you, I am similar to Justin. I use the BrainTap ever since I was introduced to it a little over a year ago. And I have just fallen in love with it. And yes, I fall asleep to your voice just about every night as well. And I'll tell you, it really makes a difference. I track my sleep on my Aura Ring. I oftentimes one of the major things that I look at for my clients, how is your sleep? And, being able to track the sleep. But one of the main things that I recommend is the BrainTap for people. Use this in, there is so much science behind it, which we're going to dive into. And, like Justin was saying, there are so many aspects that really, I haven't found anyone outside of maybe severe epileptics or, brain issues like that, who cannot benefit in some sort of fashion, even younger children. So I wanted to be able to unpack a little bit of BrainTap, what it does and how it does what it does. So did you want to talk a little bit about that and kind of introduce?
Sure. I'll tell a little bit about what BrainTap is. So those that have never seen it or heard about it or experienced it, it is like describing atmosphere to a fish. So, it's better to try it out. I know you're going to be sharing a link with them so they can try at least the audio portion. So we are an app and a hardware equivalent, but you don't have to have the hardware to get the benefit. The difference between using the hardware and software is shocking to us, really, because when we did our research, we showed that 30% of the brain will go to sleep when you just shut your eyes to meditate. And what we find is that's why the default mode network takes over and the monkey mind comes online, and then they're not able to meditate. But when you use light, the 100% of the brains has to stay active. That doesn't mean you're using 100% of its capacity. It just means it stays active because it thinks it's daytime. And of course, we've got to be more alert and things like that. So we use light, we call it retinal flashing. So it's light in the eyes. And when you see, I have one of the boxes here. So when you're looking at it, the person has the visor on. That visor actually has LED lights. Those lights are actually flickering at earth frequencies. So between 0.5 and 100, depending upon the session we want to do. And I know we're going to break out brainwaves in a moment, but each of the light frequency matches the brainwave frequency that we want the brain to go to. And there is a default for the brain in the brain waves. And when we talk about those, I'll kind of break those out. But we need to do different brain waves at different times of the day. So if somebody says they meditate, I say, so what? Meditation, we've only had a handful of people in the history of time, and we've been able to actually measure and record over 30,000 brains in the last 10 years. And I can count on one hand the people that really know how to meditate. And we had a lot of people that will say, they'll come over to our booth maybe and they'll say, I meditate, I don't really need that. I said, that's fine. Let's do a test, because we have the technology that can measure all these things, right? And they're surprised when they find out they actually stressed their brain when they meditated. They thought they were meditating, but they really stressed it out, or they fell asleep. A lot of them fall asleep and they actually have a more of a delta profile. And then, so those lights in the eyes keep you awake. And one of the key here is, you've probably heard the expression, if you have children, my children are too tired to sleep. Well, most adults are too tired to sleep. It takes energy to sleep. You're never not doing something, right? Their cells are always listening to the environment, and through that epigenetic exposure, it's either turning those genes on that are going to help you to sleep through the night really well, or they're going to turn those genes off and give you a terrible night's sleep and cause you to turn and toss. So we want to, it's very specific brain frequencies. We call those earth frequencies, by the way. Now in the ears, when somebody looks at our headset, they go, why do you have lights in the ears? That's pretty weird. But the reality is that every cell of our body has a chromophore. And guess what that chromophore is doing? A few things. One, it's gathering information in the form of energy from the world around around you, but it's also either upregulating and downregulating gene expression. So everything, when somebody says, what causes it? I say everything. So it's not like you can just change one thing. It's like your environment can change a lot of things. To give an example to the listeners, there's something called nose blindness. When you live next to a paper mill, at first, when you first move there, it's irritating, but then after a few weeks, you don't smell it anymore because the brain goes, you know what, that smell's always going to be present. They're not leaving. It must be okay, even though it's not, because odor has mass, right? So it's doing something to the body. That's also mold would be another example of that. Mold in the house, and they don't even realize that they can't methylate it, right? And they can't get it out of the body and all those things. So the brain is very good at omitting information. So we've got to present information to the brain to keep those neural pathways open. And light in the ears, that light actually changes to a different Auger frequency. There's different frequencies. We use solfeggio, rife, and Auger frequencies. All three of those get mixed into a matrix that changes where the light and sound affect the brain for different sessions. Some people go, why do we have 2,000 sessions? Because we need neuroplasticity. We need to change up all the time. Now, along with this, the light changing that. Now, how light works with the body, there's a lot of gene expression that happens when you start using red light therapy or any of the positive lights, even the negative, right? Then it doesn't matter what's going on around you, it's going to change gene expression. You're not going to escape it unless there's some kind of Faraday cage that I don't know about for the human body. But and that's going to also affect it, right? Everything is every person on this call is changing every DNA pair every 40 seconds based on epigenetic exposure. So your body is changing, adapting. We have an adaptive nervous system. We also have an adaptive, epigenetic system. So think in terms of whatever you're doing. Now, if it's all flowing and everything's going right, you keep upgrading and you optimize and you harmonize and you're in a great state. And then something bad happens, you're able to identify it and deal with it. And if you recover quickly, that's one of the things we look at is how quickly does the nervous system recover and get back to optimum peak performance, not just surviving. And then we use sound therapy because sound therapy is, that's been researched for over almost 200 years now. I mean, they were doing sound therapy even back in 10,000 years ago in the Vedas. And they weren't saying it was changing genetics, but we can prove it all is. The sound actually, when you listen to Mozart music, for instance, there's a whole science called the Mozart effect. Just listening to that music makes you smarter. So that means that your body's expressing at this highest level of activity when your brain is balanced. When you're talking about the frontal lobe and executive functioning, all problems with the brain that we find are always, I've never seen it not. It could be something different, but I've never seen it not. It's an imbalance of executive function, whether it's dementia, Alzheimer's, autism. That's one of the symptoms that we'll see. And so we're going to try to work on that first of all. And in order to do that, you need light therapy. So that's why we use the light. Now, the sound can get some really good results in our studies. And we'll just talk about sleep since Dr. Laura already started talking about that a little bit. When we did our sleep study, we found that within 3 weeks, we get coal miners that had a less than 2% sleep score. Their deep sleep was never more, and they were in bed for 10 hours, but their deep sleep was less than a minute on average of all the miners because they were drinking before they went to bed. They didn't realize that what alcohol does. And we showed them when the body actually started to try to go to sleep, but they were already in the middle of 5 hours before the digestive system actually digested that and metabolized the alcohol. And then their body was just trying to catch up and they never got the sleep. So what I tell people is sleep is not a factor of time in bed. It's a factor of getting an hour of deep sleep and 2 hours of REM as a minimum. If you get that, you're going to crush all these sleep scores that are out there, especially the Aura that I wear too, just to give me an example. There are better ways to do it. We have different ways. So the sound actually mirrors the light, or the light mirrors the sound, however you want to think about it. And then, so we have some that are just music because some people don't want to listen to a voice. But I tell people that if you don't want to change your life, then don't do anything. But if you want to really change, you've got to change the internal dialogue that you have with yourself. Most people that we see at the clinic, maybe not the people on this call because they're probably all have perfect dialogue with themselves. But in the process of, we find that most people would never talk to their friends the way they talk to themselves. You know, their internal dialogue is very negative and very not motivating, in other words. Well, that's also downregulating, because people like Bruce Lipton showed that your language actually changes 3,200 gene expressions. So when you think about what are the best things you can do to live longer, they've actually proven this in science, is to have a positive attitude. It adds 10 years to your life. There's no other intervention that works better than changing the attitude you have about yourself. Look at life more as a challenge than a threat. You know, they've done a lot of studies that show when you look at life as a threat, you're actually shutting down your system so that the threat becomes real, because you're thinking about it made it so. And even though it could be a threat, but those people that look at it as a challenge actually rise to the occasion in the body, you know, like the woman who was 87 years old that lifted the car off her grandson, you know, and she's like, how did I do that? Well, the body has potential that we don't even know about. If we can mobilize that potential, then we'll see more superheroes out there, you know, that are doing things because we have the potential to do it. We just haven't activated it. And I think it's activating in our genes. That's how it's going to change.
You know, I tell my clients, where thoughts go, energy flows.
Yes.
Because everything is frequencies.
Yeah.
You know, in one form or another. And those are read in terms of hertz or cycles per second, you know, which makes me kind of come back around to what we were mentioning about the different waves, the brain waves. And one of the things, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the BrainTap helps to get the brain in a particular state of your choosing, depending on which type of session that you're doing. So let's dive into the different brainwave frequencies, because really what they are is electrical patterns that are produced by the brain, and they are classified based on that frequency in hertz that I had just mentioned. So each frequency band is associated with different mental states and levels of consciousness. So for example, the lower or slower waves, this is called your delta waves, and this goes from 0.5 to 4 hertz cycles per second. This is associated with states of deep sleep, unconsciousness, healing. Okay, this is, you know, when we want that deep sleep, that healing that Dr. Porter was talking about, that we want to have, you know, at least an hour a night for that, you know, restorative sleeping. And these delta waves, these are the slowest brain waves, and they do dominate during deep restorative sleep, or the non-REM sleep. Very important for that physical rejuvenation and healing. The next speed or step up is theta waves. This goes from 4 to 8 hertz. This is associated with light sleep, deep relaxation, meditation, creativity, and these are present during daydreaming, light sleep, and when you're accessing the subconscious, when you want to improve memory consolidation. So really, this is associated with that creativity, intuition, deep relaxation. The next one would be your alpha waves. This goes from about 8 to 12 hertz, associated with calmness, relaxation, alert wakefulness. And this is dominant in the brain in that relaxed yet awake state. So, you know, when you are doing the meditating or resting but still awake, and, you know, this is where we want to do that, reducing the stress, the deep breathing, you know, that calm focus. Also, inspiration can come in at this time. Beta waves would be next. This goes from about 12 to 25 hertz. This is the active thinking, problem solving, focus, alertness. And this is most common during active, engaged mental activities, you know, like cognitive tasks, decision making, problem solving. You know, these higher frequencies in the beta range can actually be associated with stress or anxiety, especially if we stay there for long periods of time. The fifth wavelength range is the gamma waves, and this is like 25 to 100 hertz. This is associated with high-level information processing, peak focus, cognitive functioning. These are the fastest brain waves and are linked to that heightened perception, memory recall, that cognitive processing. And again, they are often present during moments of insight, learning new information. But I want you to realize that we are moving in between these throughout the day. And obviously you move through them when you go to bed at night and then move back out of them as you are waking up. So BrainTap actually helps you to be more focused in the level, in the range that you want. So did you want to speak into that just a little bit more, and then we'll dive into some of the genes associated with it?
Sure. Yeah. When we think about the brain too, we always talk about frequency, right? I tell people it's what you frequently see, because these brain waves will change your frequency. If you have low frequency brain waves, you're going to look for low frequency activities, low frequency foods. You're basically going to seek out, it's like water, it'll seek its own level. So we want to have that high energy frequency. And just so the listeners know, when we've measured brains, like when we do brain scans, we see delta in 90% of the people that we score as their primary brainwave when they're awake. That's a problem, because it's showing that they have inflammation, or they might have a traumatic brain injury, but usually it's inflammation, and they're trying to sleep while they're awake. So that's kind of impossible to do, right? So people will stimulate, usually using coffee and tea and chocolate. So we have to change that. And then there's another brainwave I just want to tell them about, because in our cognitive repair studies that we've seen, where we took every woman in the study, and now it's in a bigger study, which we're doing male and female, in Seminole College in Florida, and they have over 60 people now. Every one of them's off the dementia scale in less than 6 weeks, because we trained a brainwave they call SMR. Now, SMR is part of the beta alpha brainwave. So when you're in that cusp where they're switching, like it's a radio dial, it's not a digital dial. Like you can't really go from theta to beta. If you do, you're usually considered autistic, because you're either stimming, you're of high beta where you can't get rid of the energy, because alpha kind of works as a way to modulate that energy. Because when you're in an alpha state, you're kind of almost in an infinite energy state. When you're doing something you enjoy, or having fun with your family and friends, you have all the energy you need to do that. But if you're in a left brain scenario, like doing your taxes, typically it's an energy drain, right? Or you're doing the paperwork at your office or something like that. And then so that brainwave, though, as we age, we find that it atrophies, especially under stress. And we'll kind of talk about that, I'm sure, when we talk about how the brain, because those brainwaves are actually telling the body, it's giving information. Think of brainwaves when you're thinking about them out there, like Wi-Fi networks. You've probably been in your office or your home, you say the internet's down. Well, the internet isn't down. Your connection to it is down. And so the brainwave frequency might be down. So you're not accessing the information that you want or need, but it's still there. It's just not being accessed. So just think about it like, and what we're going to do is we're going to teach you to turn on the Wi-Fi networks so that you stay connected. And they're all state dependent. Like you said, when you're doing different activities, you did a great job of explaining it. When you're doing different activities, we need to be able to, almost like a Tai Chi master, we need to move between those brain waves without anyone really noticing it. If there's a problem to solve, we might drop into lower alpha, high theta, and have a solution like one of the great inventors. If there's activity to be performed, we're a professional athlete, I'm going to tell you what, you're going to trigger a lot of gamma. We've seen some professional athletes, when I have them imagine like being on the basketball court, when they're performing high level physics, dribbling the basketball, passing and shooting. Most people don't realize that's high level physics, but the brain's doing it. They have so much gamma going on. It blows my mind. It's like when we also, if somebody's out there like a Reiki healer, we see the healers, when I measure their brains, if I see a brain like that, I go, do you do any hands-on healing, or you heal? Oh, I'm a chiropractor, or I'm a Reiki healer. They do some kind of work with their body, because they're moving energy through their body all the time. So.
Absolutely amazing. Justin, I would love to hear if you could help enlighten people about the different genes that are being affected, that are going on, that we happen to look at when we are talking about brain health, and how BrainTap is affecting that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we look at 4 really important pathways at the DNA company. And I think that the downstream effect is maybe more of a brainwave dominance, for how you go about your life. Like, let's say you have that predisposition for anxiety via the noradrenaline pathway. We can operate under the assumption that you're living your life in that beta state a lot more than you're able to just easily access the alpha states and what have you. I've heard you, Dr. Porter, talk about that cell danger response, right? And how it's like your body doesn't even know the difference between a real threat and a perceived threat. And the limbic system gets triggered, and then it triggers the HPA adrenal axis. And now we've got this sympathetic nervous system dominance. I mean, the brain is such a huge percentage of your nervous system. So the genes are that really upstream encoding process to kind of show how your default setting is going to be with these really important neurochemicals. I love that you talk about how your frequency is what you frequently see, because that's one of the main kind of sayings that I say to people. You have to find a way to get into that PMA, that positive mental attitude, because if you don't, nothing is going to be possible for you, right? When you raise your frequency, quite literally, it makes everything go so much smoother thereafter. We know genetically that a lot of people have that predisposition to have a tougher time getting into those kind of flow states. So if you've had your DNA 360 done, we have a big mood and behavior profile, and it's got all these little branches to it. Everything from, logical versus emotional behavior, or even career stuff is in there. To simplify it, we're really talking about 4 pathways predominantly. We talk about the dopamine pathway, right, which is a driver. It's a reward and a pleasure system, really important for, modern context, because it gets stimulated so easily, with social media and Netflix and what have you. So we look at the receptor for that called DRD2. And then we also look at a methylation gene called COMT, C-O-M-T. And COMT, it speaks to the clearance rate of the dopamine. Some people, it doesn't clear very quickly to where they have kind of a addictive predisposition, because once they feel the dopamine hit, it just goes, right? It leaves really quick, and you're left kind of searching for the next one. Or you might have a really long COMT and it clears eventually, but it takes forever. And we find that's kind of a binging tendency. You don't just watch one Netflix episode, you got to do the whole thing. And it can disrupt your sleep, and you better do a friggin' BrainTap at some point here. So we look at that. We do look at the noradrenaline pathway, which is really important, because if you have like a deletion in the ADRA2B gene, it means that the actual perception of an event, any given neutral event, you can perceive it in a way more dramatic way, right? And there's a thing called an EMI, an emotional memory imprint, which it's like a distorted way of remembering what the event was. And you remember it as this massive trauma response. Once again, BrainTap is an amazing tool for restoring homeostasis to someone who does that all the time, myself included, by the way. I have a double deletion in ADRA2B, so the ability to make a mountain out of a molehill is certainly there, and BrainTap has helped me a ton with that. We also look at the serotonin pathway, right? So there's a gene called 5-HTT-LPR, and it really, we look at kind of the length of the receptor site. Genetically, people have a shorter or a longer receptor, and it's going to speak to the just the availability of the serotonin. How much is released in the first place, and then how quick is that kind of closed loop system going to go ahead and close off? So, serotonin is so important for mood regulation and prioritizing stimulus and what have you as well. The fourth one, and this is so relevant for BrainTap, I would love to hear from Dr. Porter if this actually directly influences the pathway, but we talk a lot about BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and we reference it as the concussion gene, because BDNF, if it's elevated, it kind of helps the brain to repair if you have something like a traumatic event take place. Genetically, a lot of people are low there, right? They don't make enough baseline BDNF, and it kind of speaks to that neuroplasticity conversation and just your ability to pick up new skills. I have genetically low BDNF, and I tend to be way more of a subject matter expert. Like, I can talk about genes all day. If I have to go fix my car, I got to call my brother-in-law because I have no idea what I'm doing, right? So BDNF would be that fourth pathway. Dr. Porter, is there any direct connective tissue between BDNF upregulation and something like BrainTap?
Oh, well, not specific. BrainTap is like a tool to do it, but what it's doing is it's creating neuroplasticity. And that's what when we talk about with sports, uh, our partner TBRX, which is Tom Brady's group, the reason that we work with them is because when you do a physical exercise, you're going to stimulate BDNF. Now, to get neuroplastic change, you need to relax, because you can't just keep triggering it. A lot of people don't realize you got to give it's like baking a cake. You can't just keep baking, can't just mixing the batter. Sooner or later, you got to put it in the oven and wait 30 minutes, right? So that's kind of what's going on with the brain. And what he says, and we go along with it, is that for every 1 minute of exertion, you need 2 minutes of recovery. Now, we're talking about major exertion, like when lifting weights, that's going to trigger BDNF. Even going for a walk, if somebody out there isn't able to do much, you got to get the body moving and breathing, because without BDNF, you're really not going to create the neuroplastic change you need. That's when the body is going to become more sedentary, and it's going to atrophy at that point. And the body's going to think that, there's big problems going on. So it's going to trigger a lot of negative stuff. So we haven't really measured if BrainTap itself triggers BDNF, but we think it does, because we have shown, like in the dementia study, we had over a 33% improvement in neuroplasticity. Now, we can't measure that. If somebody's saying, how'd you measure it? We can't measure every neuron connection. So there's a math problem that you have to solve by the energy that we can measure across the brain. So there's brain voltage, right? So one of the things that happens, and a lot of people can't make BDNF because they don't have enough brain voltage. We had somebody in here the other day that was a 3 brain voltage. And when we're younger, it's about 18.1 volts across the hemispheres. And we find that as we age, it usually drops below 10. But if you can keep it around 10.1, you're going to have a really sharp brain. And that's BDNA helps. When we say somebody goes, what can I do to increase my brain energy? Well, obviously BrainTap by bringing light energy in, but also physical exertion. You've got to get the body, and nothing works better than muscle building. Seems like the muscles really have a direct effect on how the brain functions.
So I've got a little bit of a question that I'm sure that our listeners are probably wondering. So I know that when we are measuring brain waves, like for sleep, we use EEG. That stands for electroencephalography or electroencephalogram. And basically breaking that down, because I know that's just a big word. The electro part is from electric. Encephalon is the Greek word head, brain. And then, of course, graphy or gram, it has to do with the writing. It's the reading thereof. And that's how we can measure different brain waves. Now, you were talking about voltage and the way that, like when I had gone in last year and had the testing done, how do you measure these things so that way you've got the data to show the before and after?
We do it in 2 ways. We also do it through the cardiograph, right? So your heart actually is your number 1 brain. It has 40,000 neutrino cells. So it's instructing the body twice as much as the body instructs it. So think of the heart like the orchestra leader, and it's going to send information. So that means that we can get information from the brain. It'll tell us the percentage of brainwave activity. That's really important for neurological health. Now, when we measure brain voltage, we can't do that through the heart. We have to, because the heart has a magnetic frequency. So you can measure that actually from up to 18 feet away. And we have cameras that we put into some assisted living facilities that measure heart rate while they're in bed, and the camera's on the wall, because they were getting up at night and tripping and falling and the lights were out. But it could do it through an infrared kind of just like your watch. Your Oura ring is using green light and red light to measure that information. So we can do that because it's the heart and it's in the pulses. So when the heart pulses, that information's there. Now the head, we need to put it right on. So we have to there's dry sensor technology and there's GUI. We use one that's dry sensor called WAVI, W-A-V-I, but there's probably 100 different ones out there. We like WAVI because it's easy to read. They give you a really nice report, and it's not gooey. We have 2 here in the office. We have 3 different setups, and 2 of them never get used because they're the old school type that, we have to put the gooey cap on and measure them. And every vendor will tell me it takes 15 minutes to do that test, but we've never been able to do it for less than 45 minutes. But I think that everyone should go get their brain scan done by somebody with an EEG, just to see what the percentage of brainwave activity is on across the hemispheres. And it'll also give you information about the hippocampus. You'll see how it's lighting up, because that's really important for memory. If you have any concerns at all, I think once you're 50 years old, it should be like getting, we look in the back end, but we don't look in the front end. We need to, every 5 years you have to go you check out your intestinal tract, but they don't ever check out your brain tract. I think that eventually we're going to see that happening, because if we can, they do know the sooner you start working on your brain, the better. Like you said, it was like BDNF was a concussion gene. We did a concussion study with Gaylord, Michigan. Every student in the school was in the study for a year. And what we did is half the group at the end of their treatment got a BrainTap session, the recovery, because when you're getting treatment, they don't realize they're stressing out the brain. So the first thing we had to do was show them you're stressing out. No matter what the treatment is, the person sitting there, the brain's trying to reorganize around what you just did, especially when you're doing like chiropractic care, physical therapy, something like that. But what we showed is a year afterwards, because they got the recovery right at the time, they had a 1-year washout. So if you're wondering what that means, is they didn't use the BrainTap for a year. We went back and tested them neurologically. Every one of the BrainTap users were between 30 and 70% improvement in all neurological markers. So that means the sooner we can get the brain back focused and healthy, the better off you are. And I always tell people, don't wait to have a breakdown to have a breakthrough. Just like even getting your DNA snips and figuring out who and what you are, the sooner you do that, the better. Don't wait till something happens, because just because you might be predisposed for something, there's always an option to turn that gene off and turn on a healthy gene. So, and that's where I think the science is going. It's going to tell us we can't really change how mom and dad presented themselves to us or how our body was created, but we can certainly, I tell people, I said, when you go to the kitchen to make dinner, you have to make dinner with what's in the kitchen, but a good chef can make a really good dinner with very little materials. So you just need to know how to take those things and make them work.
And I just wanted, for the audience, you had mentioned WAVI, just so they have a little basis on that. That's actually a comprehensive brain health assessment tool. It does provide objective data about brain performance, and it combines EEG and ERP measurements. So I've already explained what EEG is, but ERP is event-related potentials. So these are just brain waves that are recorded while, the person are.
There's a series of tests, a series of cognitive tests, and the reaction time is what's most important. There's something called the P300, which you can't fake. Like heart rate variability, I can beat any heart rate variability machine because I've been playing with GSR machines or galvanic skin response systems since I was a kid, so I can sit there and make them look better than they are, because that's more of a feature of your physiology, where nobody that I know has been able to move the P300, so it's actually that evoked potential of the brain is what we're looking at.
Absolutely. And, it's just amazing the way technology has moved forward to not only help, but for measurement, because obviously we want to know, is this working? I always say in webinars and to my clients that subjective data, meaning what you are feeling, the changes that you are observing within your own body, that is really important. But it's also nice to see the objective data, things like what you were saying, Dr. Porter, that you can't manipulate, purposefully like that, in the moment. So, being able to take a look at this, and I mean, this is where the sleep trackers come in. How do you get better deep sleep, REM, heart rate variability, looking at all of this data when you are sleeping. It's not like, you can fake that.
When you think about things that you don't think are stressing you, like I always tell people, look at the presidents. Just go online and put in aging presidents. You'll see what they look like when they went into office and how they end. I wouldn't want that job. It's like energy vampires get to you, and you because stress does but most people don't know that. So these measuring devices like the WAVI, the Whoop, all these technologies that you can wear, and NeuroCheck is what we have that I invented that we work with. That tool is something that lets us know an event. Like we want to know through events. Like you can say you're not stressed. I mean, we've all had the chance to have a kid come up and say, I'm not angry, and you say, okay, then breathe a little bit, unclench your fist, if you're not angry. But they, it's what we feel up here, they don't realize what they're feeling down here, because a lot of people, especially once the amygdala gets hijacked, because emotion drives behavior. If that gets hijacked, we're doing things we don't even want to do. And everyone on this call has probably had the experience where they got in an argument and they wish they could go back and change what they said or did, but the emotions took over and drove the behavior that they didn't really want, but it showed up because the body will react. If we're under stress, our body is designed to just get us out of that situation as fast as possible. And sometimes that means for some people raising their voice, other people getting physical. There's different ways that we handle things. So that's why training comes in. We've got to train the brain to respond. And when you said the nervous system is pretty much 70% of the nervous system's in the brain. So when you think about the nervous system, if you change the brain, you've changed your regulation of the parasympathetic and sympathetic system and your neurohormonal activation. So those are key things to staying regular, let's say, with your thinking and your emotional balance and what we call resilience. Right now, we need resilience more than anything else.
So, Justin, do you have any really good stories or situations where you have implemented BrainTap for yourself or for a client, and what kind of results did you get, and which genes do you feel were affected by that usage and of the situation?
Yeah, it's actually a somewhat frequent occurrence on my end, because for myself, I mean, I use it on a day-to-day basis. I aim for that 3 uses a day that's recommended in the app. I don't always pull it off. 1 to 3 is what I end up with. What I'll say is that I find, anecdotally speaking, I can access flow states easier. Like, I do a lot of boxing, for example, which we all know the potential downsides of that for brain health. So it helps me to, I think, recover on that level. But also, there's these moments in athletics where you kind of enter that let's say gamma, right? Maybe you get into that kind of creative and just high performing flow. I find I can kind of grab onto that easier when I've been really consistent with the BrainTap. Same with even just, verbally, the nomenclature is there when we do these webinars. If I've been using the BrainTap versus not, I tend to trip up on my words more if I haven't been doing it, for all of you to laugh at and enjoy. So BrainTap has been really useful for that. But in general, I would say clients that do have deletions in ADRA2B, that's really the area that I've found the most benefit. I've had plenty of patients that have all the way to panic attacks, and they've used BrainTap, and they're like, man, like, I'm just in that little bit more control. If I, got cut off in traffic or something like that, especially if they do the BrainTap with the breath source sessions that you have on there. I think that's such a powerful combo, breath work with BrainTap together. It really helps a ton with anxiety response, I've noticed, as well as my patients. And I also would say that I've been using it with any patient that I have that might have an addiction issue, like they can't quite get away from the alcohol or the drugs. And I suspect that GABA pathway with someone who's been having a lot of alcoholism their whole life gets really compromised. Like, it binds to the GABA receptor and you get this big dose of GABA, and that's what makes you so social and all these things with alcohol. But it has a tolerance effect. And the more you drink, it starts to damage the pathway itself. I don't have any data for this. Perhaps Dr. Porter does, but I suspect that the GABA pathway might actually improve over time with consistent use of BrainTap. Is that the case,
Yeah.
Dr. Porter?
Yeah, what it does, yeah. When you trigger theta or gamma, gamma, you're triggering GABA. And that's a precursor to DMT, which has they call the God molecule. So it basically opens up, and it's almost like nitric oxide, really. And that's what when you think of the benefits of nitric oxide, that's what light therapy does. It's going to create vasodilation, blood flow, and circulation. So that's also going to trigger that GABA response. So it's all about these neurotransmitters are all triggered by the different frequencies that then, of course, downstream or upstream, however you want to look at it, is going to trigger the gene expression. So it's all I tell people, it's like you take a thread of a carpet and you try to pull on it. It's not just going to pull that one thread. It's going to pull them all. It's like beads on a string. They're all going to have an activity. And most people do not have enough theta. So when you're saying that, and most people don't realize that I wrote the programs for DUIs for the state of Arizona for a number of years. And I tried to explain to them that once they get hijacked, the amygdala, that is a beta response, like a high beta. Like you're going into the primitive brain, that reptilian brain's getting kicked in, and forget about options. Because you don't have options when you're, running away from a tiger. You just get the heck out of there. So that, and then if the brain thinks that's your normal life, like what happened to us, unfortunately, during COVID, when they said the average brain shrunk 3/4 of an inch, the average teenage girl aged 4.5 years in their brain, the average boy 1.5 years, just because of stress during COVID. And it's really, when I'm interviewed about that on TV and radio, I always say, I think it's about uncertainty. The more certain you are, the more your brain opens up and provides opportunity for you. The less certain you are, like you said about your words and things like that, because when you prepare, there's a saying I have, you get what you rehearse in life, not what you intend. Because when you intend something, that doesn't mean you did something, it just means you intended it. But if you can intend and rehearse, now you've got a powerful synergy with the brain and body, and basically you're galvanizing and you're telling your system, which I now tell them it's the epigenetic system, because every 40 seconds your body's evaluating everything in making those changes. So you want to show up as your best self, but you have to prepare for your best self. I would hate to see a movie where the actors and actresses didn't rehearse, so we should do that for our own life.
Yeah, and speaking of epigenetics, I saw in the Q&A someone asked if we could briefly define epigenetics, and really this just refers to the change of gene expression, but it doesn't involve altering the actual DNA sequencing. So it's, how are the genes that we were born with, how are they expressing? Are they being silenced? Are they being upregulated, downregulated, all these different things? And what affects that? Environmental factors, inside, outside of us, our thoughts, the food we eat, the stress we have, the sleep we do or do not get, the use of devices like BrainTap. So all of these things can affect that genetic expression. That's epigenetics. And that, thankfully, we can control for the most part. And that's what we're doing, is using devices like BrainTap to be able to affect and manipulate how our genes are being expressed. A quick little personal anecdotal situation that made me fall in love with BrainTap last year. Went to a conference and ended up purchasing it. I was flying cross country from Florida to Arizona, had a layover in Austin, ended up missing my flight, and was at the Austin airport for like 9.5 hours. Not fun. And just with all the sounds, due to my particular genetics, I actually have a shortened version of the 5-HTTL-PR, which has to do with serotonin transport. Basically what that means is it makes it difficult for me to prioritize incoming stimuli. I can be overloaded with stimulation, and when I'm in very busy places, I'll tend to get headaches, get fatigue. Well, I certainly got through that 9 hours in the airport. So I realized I put my BrainTap in my carry-on. So I pulled that out, got in a little safe corner, did 2 sessions back to back. And I'll tell you what, when I was done, my headache was gone, my fatigue level way down. I was able to function much better. I mean, right there, I knew the science and theoretical because I have my, background in neuroscience with my PhD. And I'm like, knowing that is one thing, but then actually having that use, that feeling, that relief, absolutely amazing. And ever since, I have been, recommending it to all my clients. And I actually have some clients who are veterans, PTSD. And I have introduced them to BrainTap. And for years, they've been dealing, with recurring trauma. And they have told me the benefits, even just from the first session, the relief that they had gotten. And, these episodic uses, but working more into regular habit has been a tremendous help. And I know that you have a list of sessions specifically for PTSD. And actually there was a question in here about can BrainTap help people with mild cognitive decline? So, getting into stresses and brain health, can you speak into some of the sessions and what it can help with?
Yeah, we actually put together, people have asked because of our study where we took everyone off the dementia scale in 6 weeks. So, and we showed the sooner you do it, the quicker it happens. So unfortunately, because our body is designed to atrophy it's really because of stress and toxins. They've proven that the cells can stay very active and youthful. You don't have to age so fast, but like I said, like the president. So yeah, we do have that, and we have evidence that shows that. We're in a big study right now. We also have a study where we're almost ready to publish about Parkinson's, where we improved, and they had everyone in the study went from having tremors daily to no tremors as long as they did one BrainTap session, and other neurological positives too. And I think it has to do with getting them to sleep better. Because when you sleep better, that's when you build up your neurotransmitter bank account. And that's when your body compartmentalizes and organizes all your experiences for the next day. Because I believe what Deepak Chopra said over 20 years ago, he said, 97% of what's going to happen to you tomorrow, you know about today. So what are you pretending not to know? And a lot of people just never plan their tomorrow. They just let it happen to them. But what we find is if you learn to let it happen through you instead of to you, your body then becomes very there's a saying, the most flexible part of a system controls the system. So the more you try to control, the less likely it is you are going to control it. So you got to kind of go with the flow again, like think of it like energy and flowing water. That's what we want to be.
We've got another question, and we've already answered quite a bit of it from Carly, and they're asking about just wanting some clarity. I know we've covered like the purpose of BrainTap. We've talked about the specific genes, but is there anything that we haven't mentioned that you want to express to the people about, what other main purpose?
I think the one main purpose, maybe, for this group, maybe it might be important to mention, we did a peak performance study that actually Julie Arnn is just doing a TEDx talk about, because we showed Googlers who are the 1%ers. These were the top 1%, but a few years ago when they were having burnout and people were leaving the workforce because, burnout was getting to them, right? And so what happened was they asked us to come in and they asked me, what would be the one solution? Because they didn't want to change anything. They just wanted to do the same thing, but get some kind of result, right? That's not going to happen. I said, give us 20 minutes in the middle of the day. They said, why 20 minutes in the middle of the day? Well, everybody on this call at 2:00 in the afternoon, your temperature is going to drop 2 degrees or more. If your brain's dysregulated, if it drops more, you're going to think you're having low blood sugar. And you could be having low blood sugar, but it's really a factor of how your brain resets. Your nervous system's resetting. So I said, have them do a BrainTap session at that time. They said, what's that going to do? It's going to, in the morning, we wake up, there's a cortisol trough. So we have all this cortisol and dopamine and norepinephrine. And then as we move through the morning, they've proven that we get more work done in the morning than the afternoon. So at first they said, no way, we're going to give you 20 minutes in our day, because they actually get paid by what they produce. And they said, we can't give away 20 minutes. I said, just give me 2 weeks and I bet you will never not do it. So they did it. What they didn't realize when we did, and this is it's been published now, but we're doing more with it. We showed every one of them were 70, on a depression scale, they were all clinically depressed. After doing it for 6 weeks, their depression score improved 70 points. They were no longer clinically depressed. Their happiness score went up 54%. But the one thing in their sleep score went up 43%. We did nothing for sleep. We just helped them in the middle of the afternoon. But the one thing that they really liked was their work product. Everyone improved on average 23% more work done during the day. So if you think, that old saying that they have with 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where he comes up on the guys cutting the tree and he goes, why don't you stop and sharpen the saw and you'll cut the trees fast? And they go, no, we're busy cutting the tree. We can't do it. If they would so think of your nervous system or the brain, however you want to think about it, you're tuning that up in the middle of the day. You're not going to feel so tired and you're going to get more done. Because even though you're there being busy, what you find is that those moments of disassociation become longer and you're not getting as much done in the afternoon. But if you do that reboot in the middle of the day, or if you have a big meeting, do a session right before that big meeting, like Justin was saying, so you have that energy and focus, because we live in a life of energy. If we don't have enough energy, then there's no good having a business where you come home, throw the shoes off, get on the easy chair and pass out. That's when you should be having your life, because your job should give you the ability to have a good life, not be your life. So that's what I think people need to know, is that those are those 3 times of the day that Justin was talking about. In the morning, we want to wake up the brain, digital coffee, we call it. At night, we want to slow down the brain. We call that quaaludes. So, and then in the middle of the day, we want to reboot, because it re-energizes. What it does is it gives you another cortisol trough and improves because the way we wake you up, we're going to use a lot of that SMR program on the way up to really trigger the production of norepinephrine and cortisol and dopamine that we need to really function and have that focus on our work and creativity. So that's a key point that we didn't mention before.
Well, I'll tell you, this has been absolutely amazing. Fantastic information, great practical, usage. And for all of you listening and, here with us today, but, listening on the replays, we do have a code, 15% off. Use 360 DNA at checkout at braintap.com. Highly encourage the use. I want to say thank you. Thank you, Justin, for, co-hosting and providing the fantastic information that you always do. And Dr. Porter, a pleasure to, be able to talk to you today, to, get this information and to have this partnership. You are awesome. I love your product and always a fan. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And if they want to go back on one of your your founder did a DNA breakdown of my DNA. So if they want to hear, I did a podcast like a year and a half ago where he took my DNA and did a whole thing about it. We had it for our BrainTap users. So I'm a big believer, and I think everybody should get that done, because it gives you insights that you just don't know. I mean, you can pretend to know, but then you can get the real knowledge now. So I encourage everyone to, if you're a BrainTap user and you're watching this and you didn't go to the DNA company, then please go there, get it done. You won't be disappointed. It's pretty amazing information.
Well, thank you. And thank you, our angels in the background, for providing this platform and making sure everything ran smoothly. Thank you, audience. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And we hope you are walking away with some great pearls of information and look into getting a BrainTap. For those of you who already have it, good job. All right. So another webinar done. Thank you again. Many blessings. Have a fantastic day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.